This screencast will prepare you for La Belle Dame Sans Merci, which will be tested in paper 2 of the Edexcel certificate. The poem can be found in section C of your anthology. To understand a poem, it is often useful to know a little bit about the background of the poet himself. Keats was born in 1795, the son of a stable keeper. He was raised in Moorfields, London, and attended the Clark's School in Enfield. After Keats's mother's death in 1810, Richard Abbey took care of Keats and his 3 younger siblings. Although Keats was apprenticed to an apothecary, he soon realized that writing was his true talent, and he decided to become a poet. Forced to hide his ambition from Abbey, who would not have sanctioned it, Keats instead entered Guy's and St. Thomas's hospitals in London, becoming an apothecary in 1816, and continuing his studies to become a surgeon. When he reached the age of 21, Keats was free of Abbey's jurisdiction. Supported by his small inheritance, he devoted himself to writing. Within a few years, the poet experienced the first symptoms of tuberculosis, the disease that killed both his mother and brother. He continued writing and reading the great works of literature. He also fell in love with Fanny Brawne, a neighbour's daughter, though his poor health and financial difficulties made marriage impossible. Keats travelled to Italy in 1820 in an effort to improve his health, but died in Rome the following year at the age of 26. At the bottom of this slide, you will see a website that contains a lot more interesting information about John Keats. It will be worth your while to have a look at this website. At the top of the slide, you will see the website address for a song version of this poem. Please note down this website address, pause this slide, and listen to the song. Whilst listening, you will also see a range of images to do with this particular poem. Listening to the song and looking at the images, I would like you to think about what the potential themes of this poem could be. Pause now and listen to the song. This slide will give you a brief overview of what the poem is about. Pause and note down any relevant information on your own poem. Now get ready to annotate your own text. Ensure that you have a set of pens and highlighters ready. I would now like you to listen to a version of the poem read by the actor who played John Keats in the movie Bright Star. Note down the address at the top of this slide, pause this screencast and listen to the reading of the poem. I would like you to start your annotations of the poem by completing the activities listed on this slide. Pause the slide, ensure you have a range of highlighters ready, and complete these activities. You will be expected to have this work completed by your next lesson. Let's start a more detailed analysis. The poem was written in 1819 and published the next year in a form slightly different from the one that we read today. It depicts a knight-at-arms who has been seduced and abandoned by a capricious fairy. Told in the form of a dialogue, the poem recounts the experience of loving dangerously and fully, of remaining loyal to that love despite warnings to the contrary, and of suffering the living death of one who has glimpsed immortality. At the beginning and end of the poem, the knight remains on a cold hillside, a world devoid of happiness or beauty, waiting for his love to return. Some readers maintain that the poem is really about Keats's confused feelings for Fanny Brawne, his fiancée, to whom Keats could not commit fully. Others claim the story is symbolic of the plight of the artist, who, having fallen in love with beauty, can never fully accept the mundane. Either way, the conclusion is the same. However self-destructive intense love may be, the lover has little choice in the matter. Further, the more one entertains feelings of beauty and love, the more desolate and more painful the world becomes. The poem is a ballad, an old form of verse adapted for singing or recitation. The ballad form originated in the days when most poetry was memorized rather than written, and the typical subject matter of the ballad reflect a folk sensibility. Ballads are usually narrative or storytelling poems, and early ballads often addressed themes important to common people: love, courage, the mysterious and the supernatural. Though the ballad is generally rich in musical qualities such as rhythm and repetition, it often portrays both characters and events in highly dramatic but simplistic terms. Additional characteristics of the typical ballad include a set rhyme scheme and alternating line lengths. Formally, the ballad stanza is a quatrain, or a group of 4 lines, in which the first and third lines contain 4 stressed syllables, while the second and fourth lines contain 3 stressed syllables. The Belle Dame Sans Merci consists of 12 such stanzas with a slight variation. The last line of each stanza contains only 2 stressed syllables, creating a dramatic suspension between stanzas. Aside from this, the quatrains exhibit the typical ballad stanza pattern of rhyme. The second and fourth lines are set in perfect end rhyme with one another, giving the poem the musical sound most ballads feature. Before looking at the poem itself, it is worth looking at the title. On this slide you will see some notes about it. Pause now and take down these notes. We will begin by looking more closely at lines 1 to 12. The ballad consists of 2 parts of dialogue, each uninterrupted by the other, and each uncouched by the normal storytelling mechanisms for identifying speakers, I said, he said, etc. Because of this, the identity of the first speaker, whose part is completed in the first 12 lines, remains cryptic. Though he, or it could equally be argued she, reveals the identity of the other, the knight-at-arms, the first speaker says nothing, at least directly, about himself. He does, however, give plenty of information about the situation of the poem. The time is late autumn, the annual grasses having already withered and the birds having departed on their winter migration. The place, one can infer, is not always as forbidding as it seems to be now. Its desolation is simply due to the time of year. There has been a harvest, but it has ended. There is latent life present around the 2 characters. The squirrel's granary is full. Therefore, if the setting symbolizes the knight's emotional desolation, one must understand it as a function of an individualized circumstance, of a very specific but not necessarily permanent condition. Come spring, after all, the cycle of the harvest will begin again. Yet this seems little consolation to the knight the speaker describes. He is alone and palely loitering, so haggard and so woe-begone. His pallor is described metaphorically in terms of a lily on his brow and a fading rose on his cheek. Further, he appears physically ill, moist from the fever of some anguish. Though through these observations the speaker has already foreshadowed the reasons for the knight's grim condition, the form's rhetoric demands the question be asked, "Oh, what can ail thee?" A knowledge of chivalric lore should prompt the correct guess. Of a knight's 3 profound allegiances, to his god, his lord, and his lady, only the last would be described in terms of lily pallor and a faded rose. Now looking at lines 13 to 24. The story's twist occurs in the first stanza of the knight's speech. Though a lady was bound to figure into the poem, that she is a faery's child changes the expectations of the tale's outcome and causes readers to reinterpret the nature of the knight's desolation. Literature and myth are filled with examples of humans who fall in love with gods, and with little exception, such relationships bode disastrously for the mortal party. Particularly in that area of mythology dealing with fairies or fairy-like creatures, humans who become enamored of fairies, elves, pixies and the like generally suffer extreme emotional consequences once their affairs with the capricious beings have ended. Having loved an immortal, these hapless humans discover that mere mortal beauty, which can include not only human lovers but also life itself, will no longer do. Based on these conventions, readers understand immediately that this is the knight's fate, and through his descriptions of his fairy love's beauty, readers see the caprice that brings on his doom. In keeping with fairy's quick and unpredictable behaviour, her foot was light. Her long hair suggests the sensual nature of such creatures, who in law are given to continual pleasures, and her eyes were wild. The knight confesses he was taken in by his lady's behaviour and looks. She looked at him as she did love. In the terms of chivalric belief systems, earthly love is a mortally serious concept. It is at once an all-consuming renunciation of, and at the same time the earthly manifestation of heavenly love. As such, it is considered by the knight to be eternal. Yet for the lady, who as a fairy has no such ideas about heaven or about chivalry, love is a purely earthly proposition. To her, it is merely an expression of her fairy embodiment of nature, which begins and ends with the erotic. Thus she makes a sweet moan, which readers have no reason to believe is falsely manufactured. Thus as well she responds favourably to his gifts, which all present natural or sensual pleasure, a garland, bracelets, a fragrant zone. Her hold over the knight becomes complete when she sings to him her fairy's song, the type known to hopelessly enchant mortals' souls. Now on to lines 25 to 36. The lady's gifts to the knight represent her closeness to nature. She is able to find him roots of relish sweet, honey wild and manna dew. She professes to him, I love thee true. But she does so in a language strange, whose words may, and it turns out do, not hold the same meanings as the knight's. Still, the knight believes because, in the truest fashion of the romantic sensibility, he wants and needs to believe. At this point, readers might examine the various allegorical meanings readers have attached to the knight's story. While some believe it is a representation of the perils of earthly love, whose desire and randomness can seem to have the qualities of fairy love, others maintain Keats is really talking about the poet's infatuation with immortal concepts such as beauty. In either case, the lover, whether of another human or of some aesthetic concept, has little choice in the matter. To him the experience of love overtakes all, is transcendent and, at least briefly, immortal. How many lovers, after all, have behaved rashly, even self-destructively, in the belief that their love took precedence over the normal modes of conduct? In addition, how many disappointed lovers carry with them the belief that they can never love the same way again? Still, new lovers proceed despite the warnings of previously disillusioned lovers. So the knight proceeds into the fairy cave, where he says, I shut her wild, wild eyes, the repetition suggesting a euphemism for sex, with kisses for. In a poem devoid of many particulars, the number of kisses seems overly specific. Though there are many numerological interpretations of this detail, one simple explanation for the knight's specificity may suffice. It is the last thing he remembers. Moreover, it is his last act before the disillusionment and perhaps his last pure act. After the kisses, he is lulled to sleep, has his final dream, and awakes on the cold hill's side. And finally, in lines 37 to 48, in his dream the knight is warned by previous lovers to beware the lovely lady without pity. They come to him from the land of death, for once they have glimpsed immortality, all life seems a walking death to them. They are pale kings and princes, pale warriors, all heroic characters whose romantic spirit led to their demise. Yet the knight cannot heed their warnings. He too is a hero, and in the romantic tradition, a hero is often someone who cannot learn from his mistakes. Regardless, he has already experienced a heightened state from which he cannot return to any previous existence. When he awakens on the hillside, he can only loiter, waiting for the experience to return. After his fairy romance, the world is pale and devoid of charm, yet to the poem's initial speaker, the knight's vigil, however inevitable, seems to be pointless and grim. The poem concludes with the recollection of the first stanza, though the sedge is withered from the lake and no birds sing. This not only frames the poem, it also confirms that the knight agrees with the first speaker's assessment of the setting. At the same time, the knight cannot agree with the speaker's implication that no human ought to remain in such a god-forsaken place. For the knight, who has glimpsed the immortal and will probably never do so again, any other place would seem equally desolate.